Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordyn and welcome to another book series binge video. This is a series I do on my channel where I read a book series all at one time and share my opinions on it. I am not a big series reader, so when I do read series, I like for them to be already completed and again, read them all at once so that I don't have to try and remember characters and storylines for years on end until sequels are released. I do much better just reading them all at one time. So this time I am reading the Hopeless series by Colleen Hoover. Why am I reading this series? One reason and one reason only, and that is because I'm a huge Colleen Hoover fan. She has written some of my favorite books of all time, some of her romances, as well as her thriller kind of suspenseful books. And I want to read every book she's written. I have read all of her standalone books at this point, and now I'm making my way back to her series. Series romance books are what she kind of started her career on, so they're her first written books. And I've kind of been putting them off because I am not much of a series reader. Plus, I think that Colleen Hoover has gotten better and better as an author based on her standalone books and my enjoyment of her early ones versus her later ones. So I can't say that I have super high hopes for this book series, but again, I want to read them all. So I'm just making my way through them. So let's talk about Hopeless. So Hopeless was written in 2013. It's only her third ever book she ever wrote. It looks like she quickly followed it up with a sequel called Losing Hope. And then the series also consists of two novellas. Finding Cinderella was also published in 2013. And then Finding Perfect is a novella that was published in 2018. And as far as I understand, the full-length novel All Your Perfects actually goes in between these two novellas in order of the series. So there must be some crossover characters or something to that book. But All Your Perfects is primarily marketed as a standalone. I read it as a standalone, so I won't be reading it as part of this video. I'll just be keeping that in mind that like in between the last two books, the knowledge of those characters in that book are supposed to come into play. I read the back of this book for the synopsis and it didn't give me a whole lot to go off of. It sounds like it's about a senior in high school named Sky who meets a guy named Dean who has kind of a promiscuous reputation. She wants to stay far away from him, but something in him pulls her to him, and it sounds like there are secrets involved. So I don't know, kind of a bad boy romance situation. I'm sure there will be some potentially toxic behavior in here, but other than that, I don't really know what to expect. So I am going into this with an open mind. Expectations are low, but open. So I am just going to go ahead and read these books and let you know my thoughts. Because this is a relatively old book series and most people watching this video probably have either already read the series or aren't planning on it if you haven't already read it, I am going to talk spoilers about these books in this video, but I will clearly mark and say when I'm about to talk about spoilers in case you don't want to be spoiled. You can just watch up to, you know, where you've read and then stop. And if you plan to read these books in the future, you can always come back to this video to hear my spoilery thoughts. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into Hopeless. I will be back with an update once I'm a little bit into the book, once I can give a little bit more of a synopsis about these characters and what they're doing, and of course let you know if I am enjoying the book or not. So I will be back with an update soon. Okay, I'm about 128 pages into Hopeless, and I have lots of thoughts running through my mind right now. This book, off the bat, is reminding me a lot of After by Anna Todd, which is maybe not a great comparison to make right off the bat because that's not exactly considered a literary masterpiece. Nor did I love that book when I read it. But it's a very similar plot in that there really is no plot other than our main character falling for like a bad boy love interest. This is following characters in high school, so they're even more immature than After, which is set in college. And it's just very angsty teenage, like flirting, being kind of mean to each other because you know you like each other but don't want to admit that to yourselves or each other. So it's like angst and pining. And honestly, for the most part, that's fine. Is it my favorite thing to read in the world? No. But do I understand that this has an audience? And would I probably have been that audience when I was in high school? Yeah, I probably would have really loved this book when I was in high school because it is very relatable. There are definitely some problematic statements being made throughout this book that I want to make sure to address because I think anybody picking this book up right now would notice them, and I don't think you can just not address them. There's a lot of casual slut shaming. This main character talking about herself, talking about her best friend, and then things people in the high school say about each other. It's just very slut-shamey, and some of it is called out as like not good, but then some of it again is like internalized in this main character. There's also a lot of like crazy talk in here. Our main character is calling the love interest crazy and like he's literally a lunatic. And she said one sentence, and here I was thinking I'd have a conversation with just one of his personalities today. A little problematic just with how we talk about like mental health now and applying the crazy label to people. I don't think that would be written the same way today. And then a big part of this book is our main character talking about how she doesn't get like butterflies when she is interacting with guys. And this makes her question towards the beginning of the book, I guess, whether she could be a lesbian, and it's brushed off very quickly, and now she uses that like as a defense mechanism when she's talking about her feelings towards this guy, basically saying, I don't get butterflies for guys, don't worry, I'm not a lesbian, but ... And I also think that would probably be addressed differently had this book been written today, especially with our advanced awareness of all of the different types of queer. But then getting into the romance, that plays into the insta love, because our main love interest guy Holder is the one guy who gives her butterflies. So of course, it's meant to be. Speaking of Holder, I think that's also why I'm getting reminded of After by Anna Todd, because I think that main character guy is named Holden. I don't remember 100%, but I do think it starts with an H, and so they're similar in my mind. So all that being said, there is a little problematic content in here. I think we can all hopefully agree that we as a society are much more aware of how harmful some of these words, phrases, topics can be if flippantly mentioned in a book without actually, exploring the implications. And I think that's an interesting topic to bring up, because Colleen Hoover actually has come out and said if she could go back and rewrite her books, she would make changes to some of these earlier books of hers to remove problematic elements or just to update it with her current beliefs and awarenesses and things like that. So I think it all makes for a very interesting discussion in how books are published and the question of, do you have to take them with the consideration of when they were written, or do we hold all books to the same standard, for today? And if it doesn't meet today's standards of what's acceptable to say or what's harmful or offensive, do we just write off those books as bad books? Or are authors also allowed to, grow as people, and even though they can't necessarily change a book that was written in the past, make statements to say, they've changed their beliefs, or this book has these problematic elements and I acknowledge them and am working on improving as an author going forward. I don't know. I think that's a personal decision. I think if those elements are going to bother you, then by all means, don't pick up this book. Don't recommend this book. I don't think I would recommend this book today to anybody and be like, this is the best contemporary romance book. Absolutely not. I'm going to discuss it and say, this has some problematic elements. And though I can relate to a lot of it, I think it's worth being part of the discussion. So that's where my thoughts are at this point. I'm going to continue reading it, of course. I'm kind of just letting myself have a little bit of guilty pleasure enjoying this story. Not that people have to feel guilty about enjoying angsty romances or whatever types of books you enjoy. It's just typically not my favorite, but I am trying to lend myself to this book and give it the best chance possible and just go with it and try to enjoy it. So I'm going to get back to reading it. I will update you probably once I am finished with the book, kind of give a full wrap up of what happened, whether you haven't read it and want to know spoilers or have read it and need to be reminded. I will give that full summary after I finish this book and before I start the next one. Okay, you guys, I finished Hopeless, and I'm a little shocked because not only did I not hate this book, but I actually came to enjoy it. And I don't know why I'm so surprised by that, because I looked on Goodreads after finishing this and almost every rating is a 5-star rating. Like, this book has a 4.29 average rating on Goodreads, and all my friends that I follow, most of them gave this 5 stars, but most of the ratings are 5+ years old. So I don't know, I just really had it in my head that this book would be so out of date, out of touch, problematic, and not have any redeeming qualities, but I was wrong. Not that it doesn't have those problematic elements. Absolutely, it still does. I even wrote down one line Oh yeah, where Holder and Skye were talking and she's like, "You're the best boyfriend of all time." And he was like, "No, I'm the most whipped boyfriend of all time." And it's just like phrases like that you're just like, why are you saying what you're saying? But then again, when this was written in 2013, that was definitely how people talked in high school. So like, it's true to itself. And of course, there's always a conversation of if characters in a book are saying something, does that always mean that it's a direct reflection of the author's thoughts? Not necessarily. So I don't know. I'm still forming my opinion on generally like problematic statements and content and how that should affect enjoyment and recommendations for books. But anyway, moving past all of that, the story of this book turned more into not quite a thriller, but like almost a thriller in how it was written, with like the unraveling of everything that was going on. And just to wrap up my non-spoilery thoughts, I actually enjoyed where this book went. It was very heavy and dark, and I would put huge trigger warnings out there for some really tough topics, but specifically abuse, child abuse, sexual abuse, and suicide are all discussed in this book. So if any of those topics you are sensitive to, definitely be conscious that this book goes there. But I'm pleasantly surprised. I'm deciding what to rate this. It's definitely not 5 stars because of the problematic elements, because of how cringy the romance was at times. This book was also pretty smutty in my opinion, or pretty explicit, even when what they were doing wasn't necessarily the most explicit thing you can think of. The way those scenes were described were very vivid. So that's something I guess to make note of if you don't like that type of content either. But okay, let's talk about spoilers because I know a lot of people have already read this book. Let's talk about everything. So Skye is Hope. Hope was being sexually abused by her father, and so her father's sister kidnapped her basically and raised her on her own, never told her who she really was, and then Holder, her childhood friend, recognized her many years later, started a relationship with her, and eventually helped her figure out who she really is and what happened to her. I did read a couple of reviews that said they had a problem with the sexual abuse kind of being used as the twist in this book, and I think that's something that's just going to be a personal preference. And I don't know if it's because I'm someone who reads a lot of mystery thrillers, but in my opinion, triggering content is often used as twists, and you often find out about really traumatic, gruesome backstories for characters who either repress those memories or for some reason don't get told to the reader until later in the book. I think that's one of the most polarizing things about Colleen Hoover as an author, is she's not afraid to go there in a genre that doesn't always go there, whether it's emotions or trauma or whatever it is. So I think that's just a personal preference thing. I think if you have a problem with that type of content being used in a twisty, surprising way, that's valid. And hopefully people giving trigger warnings or general descriptions of books can help ward you off from books where that's potentially going to be what happens. But unfortunately, that's also kind of the name of the game with books in general, and people not wanting to spoil other people in reviews and things like that. I don't think I have a problem with how this twist was handled in the book. I actually, the later half of this book, when we were unpacking everything that happened to Skye/Hope, that was by far my favorite part of the book. So take that for what you will. I'm just so shocked that that went as well as it did, and it took a turn for the better. I'm still not sure 100% what I'm gonna rate this book. I'm actually leaning towards 4 stars. Some of the problematic elements have me wondering if I should lower that to a 3, but I think I'm going to rate it 4 stars and then within my review give some more in-depth thoughts about the problematic elements in this book and state that my rating doesn't necessarily condone or reflect positive feelings about everything that's contained within this book, but in general, I think it was a great story. So now I can go ahead and get started on book 2, Losing Hope. I honestly know absolutely nothing about what this book is about, so let's just take a little read about the synopsis. Hopeless was Skye's story. Now in Losing Hope, we finally learn the truth about Dean Holder. Holder reveals the way in which the events of Skye's youth affected him and his family, leading him to seek his own redemption in the act of saving her. But it is only in loving Skye that he can finally begin to heal himself. Okay, so it sounds like it's gonna be all about Holder's backstory, probably a little bit more about him and his sister, who we learn about in book 1. I'm not sure if this like expands the timeline or how much we're going to get after the fact of Hopeless, or if it's just going to be covering the same time period. I don't know. I guess we'll find out. I think this book is slightly shorter than Hopeless was, so I should be able to get through it even quicker and give some more thoughts as I continue on in the series. I'm a little worried because in general, sequels, especially romance sequels, I struggle understanding the point of them sometimes. But at this point, who knows what's gonna happen? I could be pleasantly surprised once again. This book could be even better than the first book. I don't know. I don't know what's gonna happen, but I'm gonna go ahead and start reading this, and I will let you know when I'm a little bit into it what some initial thoughts are. Okay, I am about halfway through losing hope, and I am losing hope. I am absolutely hating this book. The main reason is because it is exactly what happens in Hopeless, just told from Holder's perspective. I don't know why this is a thing. I know it is. Like, Midnight Sun was Twilight, told in Edward's perspective, which I think that was written after this book was published. And like, was one of the 50 Shades books told from his perspective or something? I don't understand the appeal of that type of book when you've already gotten it from the first person's perspective. Literally half of this book is conversations they've already had. We are literally just reading the same dialogue that has already happened in the first book, and I don't understand it. We're not getting that much additional information about Holder's thoughts during those conversations. The only time we're getting additional information is when Holder is not with Skye, which is not that much of the book. So I don't understand the purpose of it, other than, of course, being able to sell another book after a first book did really well. I did write down a couple of not great quotes because, again, this is full of some problematic content. In this case, it's particularly related to consent. Holder had this internal thought. He thought, that's a nonverbal cue for yes, if I've ever seen one. Which, like, is not really an assumption you can make. Verbal cues, verbal yeses, verbal consent is necessary. So didn't love that. And then halfway through this book, they're talking about kissing each other, and Skye wants to kiss him for the first time. And the previous night to that conversation, Holder was at Skye's house. They were hanging out into the night, and Skye fell asleep on her bed. Like, they hadn't done anything, and he was just sitting there. And then this next day, he reveals, except for the peck I stole when she was sleeping last night, meaning he kissed her when she was asleep, and they hadn't even kissed awake yet. That is a red flag, and I don't find that cute at all. So I'm just really not liking being inside this guy's head. He's a little creepy. I don't think this is a good relationship. The romance, again, was my least favorite part of the first book. The part that I liked about the first book was like the mystery about who Skye was and figuring that out. And since we already know all of that, that's obviously lacking from this book. That's not the mystery. So that's leaving me with like nothing to make me want to keep reading this book. So that's unfortunate that this is going so poorly. The only part that I'm liking about this book is that there are some chapters that are letters that Holder is writing to his sister. Minor spoiler, if you haven't read the first book and for some reason are still watching this video, it's revealed in the first book that his sister is dead. She had killed herself, and so Holder is just writing letters to her because he can't talk to her anymore. Also, spoiler for the very beginning of this book, I didn't realize that Holder was the one who found his sister. So that was an emotional scene to read at the beginning of this book, and it definitely makes sense why that would have affected him so much. Not only was she his twin sister, but he was the one who found her dead. That's pretty traumatic. So I do enjoy the parts where he's writing letters to his sister, saying things he feels like he can't say, especially at the beginning. He was talking about finding her in his letter, and that felt very emotional and like a side to him that we didn't see in the first book. But that is literally the only part that I've actually liked about this book, and we haven't really had that in a while. So maybe this book can pull it together in the second half, kind of like how Hopeless got better towards the end. Maybe there's some kind of like mystery or something that will come up that will keep me engaged. But if it's just gonna keep being the same exact story I read in the first book, this is not going to be a good reading or review. And then we can get into the novellas, which I am thinking will be different stories, so I'm interested to read those still. Okay, it's later. I just finished Losing Hope, and this is the most pointless book I think I've ever read. I don't understand why it needed to exist, why this story needed to be told from Hoover's perspective. I have literally nothing else to say or like spoil or anything about this book because this didn't tell us anything that we didn't know from Hopeless. The only reason I'm giving this 2 stars instead of 1 is, like I mentioned, the letters to Les I liked. The other thing that I mildly enjoyed was what I'm assuming is the setup for Finding Cinderella, the novella that comes after this book. And it has nothing to do with Hoover and Skye, but it's basically about Hoover's friend Daniel has this experience at school where he like hooks up with a girl and then she ends up leaving before he even finds out who she is. So he feels like it's like Cinderella because he wants to chase after her and find her, but he doesn't know who she is. I'm assuming that's what Finding Cinderella is him pursuing that. I will read the synopsis of this in a second to make sure I'm right, but I enjoyed that scene. And so again, I just wish this book had more of those things that we didn't already know from Hopeless. I would have loved more of Hoover and Daniel and their friendship, but that was basically nothing in this book. So 2 stars. Don't think it needed to exist. Not sure why this had to become a series, and would highly not recommend. If you have read Hopeless but haven't read the sequel and have been wondering if you should, 100% just skip it. I just told you all the good parts about it. So on we move to Finding Cinderella, which is listed as book number 2.5 in the series. Let me see. A chance encounter in the dark leads 18-year-old Daniel and the girl who stumbles across him to profess their love for each other. They agree it will last only 1 hour, then their hour is up and the girl brushes off like Cinderella. Daniel is convincing himself it was just a fairy tale. 1 year and 1 bad relationship later, he meets Six, who is Skye's best friend from Hopeless. Okay, interesting. If Six is Cinderella, I'm gonna be disappointed that it told us that in the synopsis because I feel like a book this short is not gonna have much time to do like twists and turns. And I wasn't thinking it was Six before I just read the back of this book, but now I'm gonna be disappointed. But you know what? Let's give it a chance. This book is only 130 pages long. So you know what? It's a Friday afternoon, evening right now. I'm thinking I just want to try to knock this out in 1 sitting if I can before I have to go get my kids. So that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to knock this out. I will come back with my updates, with my spoilers, with all of that. I'm really hoping this redeems book 2 in this series, but we will see. Okay, I haven't even started the actual book yet. I just read, there's like a note to her readers from Colleen Hoover, and then there's also a little introduction, I guess, called My Cinderella Story by Colleen Hoover. That's all about how she started writing and how her books and this book came to be published. And I just love Colleen Hoover, man. This is all about how she was living in a mobile home. She was working like a minimum wage job, and then one of her 3 sons followed his dream and was taking part in a play. And when she was watching him, she was like, I need to follow my dreams. So she wrote her first book and she self-published it, and she didn't expect anything to happen, and then it went viral and she became the Colleen Hoover she is today. I just loved reading that. I love Colleen Hoover, man. Even though all of her books don't work for me, I just think she is such a cool person with a cool story, and she sends a good message and she gives back to charity and to her communities and stuff. So just let it be known, even though I just bashed Losing Hope, I don't think Colleen Hoover's a bad person. She is still my favorite author, and this little note just reminded me of that. So I'm even more excited to read this little novella now. Okay, I just finished Finding Cinderella. I really liked it, you guys. What a roller coaster this series is turning out to be. Obviously, I really liked the first book. I really disliked the second book. And here I am really liking the third book. I think Daniel is hilarious. I really love the dynamics between Daniel and Six, and then Hoover and Skye. It totally ended up not bothering me that the synopsis gave away that it's Daniel and Six together, because non-spoilery, the whole closet thing happens, but then this book basically picks up 1 year later and Daniel meets Skye and they form a relationship all on their own. So it's seemingly unrelated, and I really liked the relationship. I also really liked Daniel's family, and I'm just impressed how within 130 pages I can feel so connected to characters and feel like I know their senses of humor and their personalities and like the differences between Daniel and Six's relationship with Holders and Skies. I just really liked it. I will say that the first like 100 pages are fun and witty and bantery, and then something is revealed that changes the tone. So it's definitely classic Colleen Hoover, throwing a little bit of a twist and emotional element into the book, but I really liked it. It's hard for me to say this is a 5-star book because it's so short, and like it definitely still doesn't compare to my all-time favorite Colleen Hoover books, which are All Your Perfects and It Ends With Us. Well, also Verity, but I consider that a category of its own. But in terms of her romances. But I'm gonna give it a strong 4 stars, and I'm gonna say this is my favorite of the series so far, which I was totally not expecting. And I would say if you have read the first 2 books in the series, and maybe you didn't like the second one, or even if you did, if you loved both of them, but for some reason have not picked up this 3rd book, I definitely think it's worth it. It's only 130 pages, so it's not like it's a big time commitment. I would recommend this. So skip ahead if you don't want to hear spoilery thoughts, but spoilers for this book in case you have already read it or have no plans to read it in the future. We find out that, of course, Daniel and Six were the ones in the closet that one day, and they hooked up, and turns out that she actually got pregnant from that encounter, but since they never knew who each other was, she never told him. And she ended up having the baby, giving it up for adoption, and then moving on with her life, expecting that she would never find out who that was. And I haven't looked at reviews for this book, but I'm sure some people have a problem with that trope being in here. I know that accidental pregnancy is something that people like to be prepared for. It's a little tough when it's a novella, and like if you give that trigger warning, it makes it very obvious what happened. So that's kind of tough. I didn't mind it though. I don't mind accidental pregnancy as a trope. I actually quite like when pregnancy is included in any way in books. I think it's very interesting, this being a novella, how little we actually get to like flush out that situation and how Daniel feels about it. He just ultimately supports Six and her decision and knows that she made that decision on her own. I do think if I were in that situation and I knew it happened with someone in high school, even if I didn't know who it was, I still think you'd be able to figure it out in some way, like put out some kind of message or something to try and find out who it was that you were in the closet with. So it's a little like the movie The Cinderella Story, when Chad Michael Murray doesn't recognize Hilary Duff, and then they're doing like the auditions or whatever to try and find out who she is, and it's like you really don't recognize her, like it's not that hard. It's a very different situation here, but it kind of reminded me of that because it's like, put out a message, hold auditions, like find out who you were in the closet with. Just a funny comparison because obviously they're both Cinderella type stories. So yeah, all in all, a really fun book, a pleasant surprise. And now I am left with just one novella left. I still have to read Finding Perfect, and all it says is that it brings back several of Colleen's most beloved characters. It's told again from Daniel's point of view, which I'm excited about, and it's just the conclusion of the story. But it does say that you need to read Hopeless, Losing Hope, Finding Cinderella, and All Your Perfects first. So All Your Perfects is a book by Colleen Hoover. It's a full novel. It's marketed as a standalone. I have read it. I've actually read it twice. It's one of my favorites, like I've mentioned a couple times here. I'm very interested to see how that book ties in with this one because I can't think of any overlapping characters from the Hopeless series in that book, but clearly they're going to interact somehow. I'm not going to spoil that book because I think, one, if you haven't read it, you need to. If you like Hopeless, you definitely will like All Your Perfects, or I would hope so, because I think it's even better of a story. Plus, it's a newer book that is still getting lots of hype and praise, so I wouldn't want somebody to like accidentally get spoiled for that book by watching this video and not realizing that that book was kind of part of this series. But non-spoilery, that book is about a married couple. I can't remember what the girl's name is, but the guy's name is Graham. And it tells their story in two different timelines. One is present day, when they are, I think, 7 years into their marriage and they've been struggling with infertility, and that is taking a huge toll on them as a couple and really testing their marriage. And then we get flashbacks to when they first met and like the beginning of their relationship. So you really get a strong juxtaposition between the beginning when things were seemingly perfect and they were so into each other, and then 7 years later when they're really struggling and trying to work out whether they should even stay married. Very hard-hitting, very emotional. I definitely teared up when I was reading that book, and I love it a lot. So again, I'm excited to find out how those characters come into this story. This book is 122 pages, and the writing on these pages is so big. I cannot imagine this book taking me more than an hour to read. Unfortunately, I don't have time to read this book right now, but I am going to try to finish it by the end of tonight. And I'm really excited to do that now that I'm like totally invested in this series again. I'm hoping that this is a good, worthy conclusion, and I'm just excited to give my overall thoughts. So I will make my way through this small book tonight. I will be back with my opinion on it and my overall thoughts about this series as a whole. So yeah, let's do it. Okay, ignore my unmade bed. I'm hiding from my children in my bedroom, but I just finished Finding Perfect, the last book in this series, and I got a little emotional while reading it, which I feel tells you all you need to know about my feelings about it. And I think to really talk about it, I just have to spoil it. It's so short that you can't talk about what it is without telling you everything that happens. So I'm gonna go ahead and spoil this. If you haven't read this last little novella, I think it's worth doing. It's not like twisty at all. So I guess if you really did want to hear the spoilers, like you could still read it and it would be fine. It's not like you would find out a major twist, but I didn't know anything about it going into it and I really enjoyed it. So I think I'm gonna give it 4 stars. Let's talk about what happened. So this book is basically a couple months after the end of Finding Cinderella. Daniel and Six are in their first semester of college and they're struggling a little bit. Six has been really sad lately, and Daniel finds out it's because she's just sad about giving up their baby for adoption and the fact that it was a closed adoption, so she'll never know anything about her baby or where he went or if he's doing okay or anything like that. And so of course Daniel takes it upon himself to try and find the baby's adopted parents, and it turns out that it's the couple from All Your Perfects, which, you know, if you've read that book, is about a couple who has fertility issues. Turns out that a few years after that they decided to pursue adoption and they adopt this baby, which I think is just like, it's kind of fun to have characters come together in that way. And like, is this kind of a cheap sequel novella to have? Yes, because there's no indication that like this all came together when the books were originally written. It's just like an after the fact way to write something a little extra that you know will be like fan service. But you know what? That's fine. I really enjoyed reading this, and I love that this gave the perspective of adoption obviously being really hard for the biological parents, in this case specifically the biological mother, because you're giving up a baby. But I think this book also puts a lot of focus on the gift that adoption can be for a couple like Quinn and Graham who can't have children themselves, and how an adopted baby can fill their lives with so much love and joy. And I like that it gave the perspective of this couple who adopted this baby. They originally did a closed adoption, but because of the joy and love they feel for this baby, they know that the parents might be out there missing the baby, so they want to give that couple, you know, the chance to see the baby and also get the love and joy from the child, even if they're not in a position to be the ones to raise the child. It's just very feel good. The only thing I kind of have an issue with is the fact that Daniel did go to such lengths to try to find the birth parents, because obviously closed adoptions are in place to protect the child and to protect the family that's taking care of the child, because sometimes the birth parents don't have pure motives, and I do think those legal barriers are in place for a reason. But I see the counter side where some adoptive parents might be completely open to the birth parents having a relationship with the child. So I just think it was a sweet little story. It did make me cry because I am particularly sensitive to children and like parent-child relationships. And I do feel like I really got to know Quinn and Graham in All Your Perfects. So I feel like I felt their struggles and I enjoyed seeing them have the joy of adopting a baby. So it gave me the good feels. I'm also kind of glad that this was just a novella because I think it got you the good feelings, it got you what you wanted, it got you the resolution, but it doesn't have to be long and drawn out and introduce like a twist or an emotional element where maybe there doesn't need to be one. So I liked it. I'm giving it 4 stars. With that, I am so pleasantly surprised by the Hopeless series. I took a thumbnail picture and was planning to do a title of this video that was very like clickbaity and insinuating that this series is going to be bad, because honestly I didn't expect it to be that good. I expected to kind of rant on it a little bit, but Colleen Hoover has restored my faith once again. I don't think these books are for everyone, but they worked for me. Well, 3 of them did at least. Hopeless I gave 4 stars, Losing Hope I gave 2 stars, Finding Cinderella and Finding Perfect I gave 4 stars. So I don't know, you guys, this is actually making me really excited to continue diving into Colleen Hoover's backlist. I have 2 more series of hers that I need to read. I need to read the Slammed series as well as the Maybe Someday series. Let me know if you have read either of those and what your thoughts are on those series, and of course the Hopeless series if you've read it. I'm not sure if I'm planning on vlogging those 2 series yet. I think it kind of depends on what the reception to this video is, but I would be open to it if you have any interest in watching me read those series and share my thoughts. So let me know if you have an opinion on that. But yeah, certainly unexpected results. I'm very happy to have read this series. I read it really quickly, so I'm pleasantly surprised. Say what you want to say. I don't care. I'm a Colleen Hoover stan. I don't think she's perfect. I think she has written problematic things before, but I think she is a good person. I support her as an author, and that's just all there is to it. So other than that, I don't think I have anything else. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in my next one.